So thank you very much to be with us today. Well, the residents have continually refused to be on the interviews or shows like this. Right. So it's quite an exceptional, rare occasion, isn't it?
Oh, definitely.
Mm-hmm. レジデンスはめったに人の前に現れないんで、インタビューというのは非常に珍しい機会だというわけなんです。
Well, it's basically based on your concept of theory of obscurity, or tactics of strategy of obscurity. Could you explain a little while about it?
Well, the theory of obscurity. The theory of obscurity is a principle that the residents worked under a lot in their early years. When you are sitting in the middle of a department store in a big record store, it's hard to be very obscure, so the theory no longer holds. But the theory was based on the idea that the more secrecy that an artist used in which to create his work, the more pure the work will be. And initially, this is what was very important idea to them, to keep their work very pure. So consequently, they did as much of their work as possible in secrecy and shrouded themselves in secrecy. Once again, it's not really a valid idea for them, but still one that they found interesting.
何言ったっけね、訳してやっぱり。
何言ったの？いや、それは。まあでレジデンツというのはそうやって、インタビューを拒否したり何したりということで、一応その、秘密の戦略というのかな、少し隠れてあるっていうタクティクスをずっと取ってきたと。で、細川が訳すと思って僕はほとんど覚えてないんだけど、まあ結局こういうマスメディアサーカスの中では全てが表層化されて流通しているわけだけれども、その中で、アーティストが自分の作品をいささかでもピュアなもの、純粋なものに保つためにはですね、ちょっとそういうメディアサーカスから距離を置いて、いわば穴の中に隠れるような感じで、いることが必要なのではないかと。それが言ってみればそのobscurity、少し隠れて暗くあることの戦略だというふうな話です。
On the first record, as a Meet the Resident, you're incarnated into the figure of fish, Ringo Starr fish, John Lennon fish, and George Harrison fish, and later you changed your animal, your kind of totem, in eyeball. What is the basic idea to choose the eyeball as your figuration, as your figure or your appearance?
Well, the eyeball originally was an idea for the Eskimo album. It's hard. This is something that came from the residents themselves that they wanted to do this.
Yeah.
They never really said what exactly the idea was. My own feelings are that it's sort of a way of looking back at the world, and a lot of what the residents like to do is look at the world, take it inside of them, twist it a little bit, and then feed it back out.
Yeah.
And I think the eyeball is just the residents' way of letting the world know that they're looking at them. It's the residents' way of letting the world know that they're being watched.
Yeah. レジデンスの最初の LP、ミスターレジデンスでは魚がなんていうのかな、魚がビートルズのメンバーの名前にくっついているわけなんですが、その後この眼球っていうか目の玉のレジデンスになったのはエスキモアルバムからなんですが、その目というもの、眼球というものをどうして選んだのですかというこの僕の質問に対して彼の答えは、その目によってそのレジデンスの世界の見方をはっきりと示すため、レジデンスがその過去を振り返るときにその使う道具というのは目なのだというような大訳するとそのようなことを言ってました。You think that the big bubble is a more refined, sophisticated one, which cannot be regained by, which is not the same as the Eskimo album.
Right. Once again, I think that there's a certain roughness and directness that the residents wanted to get with the big bubble, which to a great extent was successful, but still it still comes across as a very sophisticated record. There are the very early tracks of that that are very rough. They're very rough, but they wanted to polish them a little bit more.
最近のビッグバブルズという日本語でも出てるアルバムなんですが、それにもその初期に録音したエスキモの頃に録音したトラックが入っていたりしているんです。でそのエスキモの後でも それからその前でもその音楽をその洗練していく過程っていうのは常に行われているというようなことであります。
Well, after the figuration of eyeball, then came the mole, moles and chaps. It's mythology. Well, and obviously, this figure of moles is closely related to the concept of holes or underground culture itself. In this case, underground is not in figurative meaning, but literary underground. It's a hole, you know. Well, and for example, I attended last night's show. I was impressed. It was amazing. But you know, it was so crowded, and it was just as though we were in a huge shelter, sort of shelter against nuclear warfare or something like that. And it was so crowded. There are many people, and each of us has a very tiny space, 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters or something like that, and pressed each other. So there was a fierce struggle for space among us, you know. Well, I think this concept of underground culture and sort of struggle, and at the same time sort of peace or something like that between people in the whole, is a very interesting point of your activity concerning Mole's show.
Yeah, well, the residents obviously have been very interested in primitive people, and having worked so much in the so-called underground,
and troglodyte,
right, right. I mean, it has been written that the whole story of the moles is actually an allegory of the story of the residents themselves, and the residents leaving the safety of the underground in order to come out and do appearances like this is very much like the story of the moles leaving the safety of their homes.
And these appearances are very risky for them.
Right,
isn't it?
right.
It's exposure.
Right.
It contains some risks and dangers.
Right.
まあ一応魚の格好の後こういう目玉の格好がなって、その後モグラっていうのが出てくるんですけども、でそのモグラっていうのは多分そのアンダーグラウンドカルチャー一般みたいなものと関わってるだろうと。ただそのアンダーグラウンドっていうのはその文化的な意味でアングラっていうだけじゃなくて、文字通り穴、地下の穴みたいなものです。で、昨日のショーに僕は行ったわけだけれども、それはまあ言ってみれば核戦争後のシェルターみたいなところでみんなが押し合いへし合いしてて、それで、もう限られたスペースをめぐって悲惨な闘争があって、僕は細川氏の隣に割り込んでその隣にいた人にものすごい怒られるという悲惨な体験をしたんですけども、でそういうふうなこと全般をどんなふうに考えているのかっていう話をしてて、で、彼によるとそのモグラモールっていうのは、まあ、いわばレジデンツ自体のアレゴリー寓意であって、でレジデンツは普段そのさっき言ったようなマスメディアから少し距離を取ってそういう穴の中に、安全にいるわけだけど、時々こうして危険を冒して出てきて、こうやって姿を現したりショーをやったりすると。So, please go ahead.
I have to say that when the residents read that someone was comparing their own lives and stories to that of the moles, they thought that was quite a funny idea. There was another writer one time that wrote that he thought that the residents were actually 4 interior decorators that all lived in a large warehouse in Los Angeles, each one having his own floor decorated to his own taste, and he nicknamed them the 4 interior decorators of the apocalypse. They like that quite a bit too. So it's hard to tell what they believe and what they think.
Well, the Eskimo, the backing to on the underground culture in general. What is the connection, or what kind of relationship does the resident have with the San Francisco culture, San Franciscan culture? For example, I'm thinking about the acid culture in the 50s and the 60s. The flower movement is a famous one.
They actually have very little formal connection. I know the residents were in San Francisco when a lot of this music was happening.
Yes.
They were just starting to do their own music at the time.
Yes.
And a lot of the acid music was very influential on them. I think they felt like in a lot of ways, a lot of the people that were doing that music that was very innovative in the 60s
Yes.
Became very commercial, and the ideas became very dry in the 70s.
Yes.
And I think they saw that as a certain inspiration for themselves, because these were ideas that could be pushed further.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of what they were trying to do.
60年代のサンフランシスコのアシッドカルチャー、ドラッグカルチャーとかそのアンダーグラウンドカルチャーとの関係は聞いたんですが、非常に、関係はしてるというかな、そんなにでも特になんか入れ込んでるっていう感じはないんですけども、I hear that you so can I for example the other aspect of the acid culture will be represented by the Philip Dick, Philip Dick,
right.
the fascinating science fiction writer, and I hear that the resident member have already seen many times the Blade Runner film.
Oh, definitely. They a couple of the residents have been very big Philip Dick fans.
Yeah.
And actually, I think one of them talked to him on the telephone one time. Gary Panner,
Yeah.
who is an artist that used to live in Los Angeles, lives in New York now, and
Yeah.
has done a lot of work for the residents, a lot for Ralph Records. I
Yes.
think he's recently done a lot of stuff in Japan.
Yeah.
His wife was very good friends with Philip Dick, and a couple of the residents were over at his place one time, and she was talking to Philip Dick on the phone, and she just gave the phone over to one of the residents, and they had a short little conversation.
The Dick is the Dick and resident have met.
細川さんの質
Well,
問
one
は
of them, no, one of them spoke to him on the phone. Right,
ド
yeah.
ラッグカルチャーのまた別の一端としてフィリップ・K・ディックなんかとどういう関係があるんだろうかということでGo on.
Yeah, and I'm.
実際にレジデン
But
スのファンの
what
一
kind
人
of
は
impression do you have on the Blade Runner, for example?
とにかく
Blade Runner?
ディックの小説の大ファンだし、それから
Because it's just
みんな
the only film
ブレードランナーの映画を何度も何度も
which
見
can be seen in
て
Japan
かなりマニアックに
as the
喜んでいたというふうな話です。
film, not his own. Because, for example, the first scene of the Chinatown in the future city is so impressive for me. A kind of mixture of the old culture and old popular culture and high-tech culture. It mean which can be seen also in the Eskimo album and Residence. It mean the primitive culture of the Eskimo races and the high technical musical synthesization.
Right. Yes, sort of a strange mixture between what is primitive and what is high tech, or the dead tech and high tech, sort of.
Right. The residents are very fascinated with primitive cultures, and I think in a lot of ways they see our modern superficial society as sort of crushing a lot of the primitive aspects that have been with us for a long time, and they don't really want to see these things go. And this is a lot the reason I think that they reinforce a lot of primitive things in their music. In a lot of ways, the more sophisticated the music gets, the more they feel the necessity of keeping a certain primitive quality. Once again, this is why on the latest album, they use no drum machines or anything. Everything is done very much live in the studio, which is a very different approach for them. But it sort of allows them to get back to the basics and keep a certain primitive quality.
例えばフィリップ・ディックの続きでブレードランナーという映画の最初のそのチャイナタウンのシーン、非常にローテックなというか大衆的なものとそのハイテックな未来都市のイメージが奇妙に混合しているっていうシーンがあるんですが、それが例えばエスキモーっていう彼らのアルバムにあるそのプリミティブな文化とそのハイテックなミュージックの電子音楽との混合というようなものと非常に連想ゲーム的になんかくっついているものがあるというふうな僕の考えなんですが、その彼らは今そのプリミティブなものになんか変えろうとしている、そのプリミティブなものに 決して忘れないような方向に進んでいると。で最近のアルバムでもドラムマシンを使わないで非常に原始的な電気装置で音楽を作って、これは大変彼にとって難しいアプローチではあるけども非常にやりがいのある、でこれからやらなくちゃならないアプローチだというようなことを言ってます。
And the shows, also the shows you gave in Japan, is sort of a cabaret, not a sort of huge performance like Flunky Goes to Hollywood or something like that, but cabaret, electronic cabaret in a very tiny spaces, right. And this concept is maybe be connected with what you told.
Yeah, the residents actually this show, the latest show that has just been playing in Japan, is very much designed to be electronic cabaret. The last show that they did was a big stage production, and they had 20 backdrops that were all very large, 15 feet high, 10 feet wide, and they did about 30 shows in Europe with this very large show. And while they really enjoyed that, part of the idea of getting out and leaving is to have more contact with the audience.
Are you okay?
Part of the idea is to have more contact with the audience.
Yes.
And so they really wanted to do a very small show this time.
Yeah.
Go into smaller places with closer audiences, and just be more sort of cabaret style.
Yeah. 浅田君の質問はエレクトリックキャバレーというようなものが最近彼の昨日見たショーから思い出されるけども、
でだから大コンサート、フランキー・ゴースト・ハリウッドみたいな大コンサートもあり得るけれど、あえて小さなスペースでそういうキャバレーっぽいことをやると、しかもエレクトロニクスを駆使してやるっていうのは今言ったことと関係があるでしょうかっていうこと。
それでつまり観客との直接的なコンタクトを持つためにはそれまでやってた大きなショーだと非常にうまくいかないと、それで日本でやってるような小さなショーをやり始めたということなんです。実を言うと僕は去年2年ぐらい前にイタリアにいる時に彼らのモールショーを見ていて、でそれが非常に引き金になって次のウェーブっていう雑誌に載る論文を書いたりしてるわけなんですが、what is the basic difference from so the mole show is totally different from the show you gave in Tokyo. What not only I think not only the dimension, not only the numbers of the musicians and dancers, but also the basic idea is different. It is not the reduced version of the mole show, but also but totally different thing which you have just now begun. Is it right? But before the mole show, you gave some show. For example, I'm just thinking about the photograph of which album? Fingerprints, I think. Your live show at Berkeley.
Right.
It was very small and still obscure show. That show was a little like show in Tokyo. Or?
Well, I would say actually you're probably right.
Yeah.
I mean that show.
And 76.
Yeah, okay. It was about 10 years ago, and
yes.
actually that was put together for one single performance.
Yes.
And that performance was done, but I think that you're probably right. In general, it was very similar in some ways. Once again, I think the primary thing here is that the residents really, in terms of more or less coming out from the underground, they want to feel like they're actually getting contact with people.
Yeah.
And by doing a smaller show, a more intimate show,
yes.
they actually feel the presence of the audience. The last show that they did, which was the Mole Show,
yes.
Okay, all the music was done with the residents wearing headphones.
Yes.
And it gave them a very efficient system for monitoring their music.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it very distanced and removed them from the audience. They had headphones on. They played behind a screen.
Yes.
And a lot of times they couldn't even tell if the audience was applauding or not.
Yes.
And after it was all over, they said, "Okay, well we've played live, but have we really played live after all?"
Yeah.
Because we couldn't really get the feel of the audience.
Yeah.
So I think that's a lot the basis for this show.
モールショーという非常に大きなそのショーの前に小さなショーもやってたんで、それはフィンガープリンスという LP がその辺にどっかにあるんですが、ないか。 フィンガープリンスって LP の裏面に出てる76年のバークレーでやったショーの写真が1枚だけ残っていて、それは非常に小さなショーらしくて、女性の歌手が1人歌ってるだけっていうような感じなんですが、それはそのレジデンスが地中から地上に現れた時に観客との直接的なコンタクトを持ちたいと思って考えた小さなショーだった。その後モールショーでは非常に観客との距離が空いてしまった、非常に大きなパネルがあって、でメンバー自身はモニターで耳でヘッドホンでモニターしながら聞かなくちゃいけなかったりというような非常に巨大なショーになってしまったので、今回ではそれまた元の小さなショーに戻って、その観客との直接的なコンタクトを求めようとしているということなんです。
And what about the story itself? Between the music you played on the latest show or the music which we can hear in the Big Bubble album,
right,
is somewhat different from the music, for example, of the tunes of Two Cities. The tunes of Two Cities are very interesting, but the new music has an aspect which has a far more intense black humor or something like that. It's far more strong. Right. So maybe they may have a sort of accident or warfare, something like that between these two albums, didn't you? We don't know very much about the history between moles and chaps, something like that. Maybe after the tunes of Two Cities, maybe war may have broken out between moles and chaps or something like that.
Well, the story is basically told on the first album, The Mark of the Mole. Okay, the tunes of Two Cities, the residents create fictitious music of two fictitious cultures. And the music is supposed to be, more or less music that could have happened at any time in that culture. In other words, it's not necessarily related to the story itself, as more background information to tell what these cultures are like. Sort of like publishing books that were mold books or chub books. The newest album, The Big Bubble, is more fictitious music, but it's after the two cultures have combined. And so the story ends at the end of Mark of the Mole with the two cultures in conflict, and the conflict is yet to be resolved. So what happens is then the story skips, say 20 or 30 years, and then you have a band that has grown up with after the cultures have started mixing.
From cross-hybridization.
Right, exactly. So this is a band that's made up of very strong mole and chub influence. And this band will then play a strong part in the story once part 3 of the story comes out, which will complete the entire trilogy.
Okay. We'll wait for it. それでそのショーの中身の方なんですけども、一応そのモグラ族と、チャブっていうのはなんていうのかな、魚を食うというよりは魚の匂いを嗅いで陶酔する人たちなんですけども、そういうモール族とチャブの戦いのストーリーがあるわけです。それで1枚目のマーク・オブ・ザ・モールっていうのは大体その2つの文化があって、それが葛藤するんだけれども、まだその葛藤は解決されないというところまでを描いていると。で2枚目の、二都音楽というのかな、その2つの都市の、Tunes of Two Cities というやつが、その2つのカルチャーの、特色を見せるために、お互いの曲を1曲ずつ交互に出していると。で、その3枚目、それから今度のショーでやったような音楽っていうのはそれより随分テンションが高い感じがすると。それブラックヒューモアの程度が高まっているような感じがするんだけども、これはどういうふうに位置づけられるのかっていうようなことなんですけども、それは一応その2つのカルチャーが接触した後、2、30年スキップした後にですね、そのモール族とチャブ族のなんていうか異種交配から新しいバンドが生まれてきて、それがビッグバブルというバンドなんですけども、それが過去の記憶に基づいて音楽をやっているっていう風な、そういう設定になってるらしいです。よくわかんないけど。でそれ第3部が出て、 そのビッグバブルというのは第4部3部作の第4部なんですけども、今度第3部がちゃんと出るとストーリーが分かるということでした。
So you another series of your series of recording is called The American Greatest Composer. The first issue has been already released with the name under the name of George Gershwin and James Brown.
Right.
Do you continue working? The residents will continue working on that series.
Right. The residents actually plan the American Composer Series to eventually encompass 20 composers.
Yeah.
The next record is already in progress.
Yeah.
And it will have the music of Hank Williams and John Philip Sousa. There are a lot of other composers that the residents want to do, including Stephen Foster, Captain Beefheart, possibly Bob Dylan.
Yeah. Smokey Robinson. Yes.
Smokey Robinson is one that they're interested in doing. Charles Ives they're interested in doing.
Yeah.
And these records will be continued to be released until the series is finished in the year 2001.
Yeah. So you would like to identify yourself in the history of American music and with this series of recording, or you would like to present your idea, your perspective of American musical history in general.
Right. One of the things that, as I was saying before, sort of the idea of taking the eye as a symbol of the residents, looking out at reality, bringing it in, twisting it, and turning it back.
Yeah.
Okay. They enjoy doing that with American culture or Western culture, but particularly American because they're Americans.
Yeah.
But they enjoy doing that with music more than anything else because this is the medium in which they've worked the most. So one of the two lines that the residents sort of parallel creative lines that they've worked under a lot. One is to create brand new music that's never been heard before, that's totally original. The other one would be to reinterpret music that's already existed.
Yeah.
And they really enjoy doing both.
Good. レジデンスは今アメリカン・グレート・コンポーザーっていうシリーズのレコーディングをずっとしてて、第1作はジョージ・ガーシュウィンとジェームス・ブラウンっていうの2人を表と裏に使ったレコードがもう発売されてるんですが、そのシリーズでこれからも仕事をしていくそうです。それでその第2部は、ハンク・ウィリアムス、カントリーのですね、ハンク・ウィリアムスとスーザ、マーチ王のスーザとその2人を扱ったレコーディングをすでにやってあって、今発売の時期を待っていると。でその他にスモーキー・ロビンソン、モータウンの人ですね、それからスティーブン・フォスターとかチャールズ・アイブスとかキャプテン・ビーフハートとか、いろいろアメリカの彼が考える偉大な作曲家のその
レナード・バーンステイン、
ブルース・スプリングスティーンとかね、そういうアメリカのGreat Composersの曲を自分たちのバージョンでやり直すということで、まずは過去を見直そう。その他にまだ誰もやったことないのはオリジナルの音楽をやっていこうっていうのは、未来と過去と2つ戦略を分けて活動していきたい。でレジデンスの眼球っていうのは、眼球のモデルっていうのはその外を見ながらそれを内へ見返すっていうのかな、こうひっくり返ったような眼球のイメージがあるんだけど、そのひっくり返っている時のねじれをもっと利用して、その過去と未来と両方に伸びていきたいというようなことを今話してました。So Bruce Springsteen, why Springsteen?
No, I said actually Leonard Bernstein, not Bruce Springsteen.
Excuse me. バーンステインでちょっっと僕の聞き違いでした。
レナード・バーンスタインの方でした。
全然スプリングスティーンとは関係なかった。Sorry, I'm just.
No, it's okay. They might do Bruce Springsteen someday, but he has to get a little older first.
まあスプリングスティーンもやるかもしれないけど、もうちょっとね彼が追いぼれてからだって。Well, so ね。Now the time if the first age of first generation of psychedelic culture in the 60s is matured in the California with many, I think, very stimulating culture in the 60s, and now the 80s it has the new psychedelic culture. It is so-called new psychedelic culture, which is now kind of a retrospective idea on the mode, on the fashion, and the culture scene, on the music scene. Do you think that that kind of new psychedelic or the old psychedelic is connected with the residence activity, residence work?
Well, once again, I think that it was definitely connected in that.
Yeah.
That was music that the residents listened to a lot during their sort of years that they were forming their ideas.
Yeah.
I mean, they listened to a lot of music at that time, including a lot of soundtrack music, a lot of music from various different cultures. So it was definitely influential on them.
だから今最近ニューサイケデリックというようなことが言われてますが、そのかつての60年代のサイケデリックとそれから今のサイケデリックとレジデンスは非常にその関係を持ちながら活動を続けているというような。
I know that a lot of the really psychedelic music from that era that they listened to a lot at that time.
Yeah.
Some of them have gone back to it and listened to it since then, and found it not to be quite as strong or to have quite as much staying power as it seemed like it had it originally at the time.
Yeah.
I heard one of them commenting the other day that really they felt like, in terms of rock music, most of the music that was done in the 50s and the early 60s, when the genre was alive and really being invented, that's actually more the stronger material than a lot of the late 60s stuff that's really more derivative of the original.
Yeah, so you the residents have more connection with the early 60s? Or
well, I think they have ultimately more respect for it.
Respect for
like the mid 50s to the early 60s.
So Little Richard, Presley and the Boss, example, is a number which show your attitude towards the culture of the 50s.
Right.
60年代というよりむしろ50年代の方がレジデンスにとっては重要で、例えばエルビスと親分っていうんですか、そのメモリアルヒッツにも入ってますが、そういった曲でエルビス・プレスリーの 50s に50年代文化とのつながりを彼らは非常にこう持っているというようなことを今話したんです。
Well, let me pose a very silly question. Well, coming from the West Coast to this condensed media situation in Tokyo, well, maybe you may have a lot of impressions, and etc., etc. But what is the major impression you have?
The major impression that all the residents have overwhelmingly is very positive of Japan. They actually haven't had a whole lot of time just to be out looking around, but every time they drive from one place to another, they're constantly staring out the window. They went to a very small place in Shinjuku the other night. And matter of fact, they stayed out a little bit too late.
In Kabukicho or something like that?
I'm not really sure. It was a very small bar.
Yeah.
ウエストコーストから日本に来てどういう印象を持ったかっていう、非常に凡庸な質問をさせてほしいというんですけども、そうするとレジデンツもたまには穴から出て、下界を眺めるっていうことが必要で、そういう意味では日本ではとってもポジティブな体験をしたと。でこの間は新宿のどこかよく分かんないんですけども、すごいちっちゃいところで夜遅くまでいたりしてとっても面白かった。
It's like they went to a very small bar, and there was a woman that worked in there that served them, and the bar only had 7 seats, and it was the residents and Snakefinger and 2 more people.
And you yourself?
Yeah, one of them was me, right? And they sat there for a while, and I don't know, the atmosphere as sort of in the United States there's so much space. and you get in Tokyo and everything is so small and everything has been compacted and miniaturized, and you would feel that coming from America, you would think that to go into a bar that only had 7 seats, you would feel very claustrophobic and very tight and confined. But actually, it was very warm. It was very pleasant. And then after being there for a while, a middle-aged Japanese man came in with an accordion that he played. And at first, everybody thought, oh well, he's just going to play some sort of schlocky American standards, play Misty or something like that. And then he started playing, and he played beautiful traditional Japanese music, and had a wonderful singing voice. And they're very moved and touched by it.
Good. It was a very good hole for the moles.
Very much so. Very much so.
先日その行った小さなバーは席がカラオケバーだったんですね。それで、席が7つしかないと。で広大なアメリカから来るとですね、広大なアメリカでもしそういうバーに入ったとしたらほとんど閉所恐怖症になってしまうんだけれども、全てがとってもコンデンスされてコンパクトにミニチュア化されている東京では不思議とそういうところでも割と平気で、そこで、日本の中年のおじさんがやってきてカラオケを歌ったりなんかしたらしいんですけども、それはとっても感動的であったというようなことです。
何かあるかなと。会場の
So, and what about this space, for example? This is a huge record shop.
Well, actually, the residents haven't really gotten much of a chance to look around. I know I've been looking around quite a bit while we've been having the interview. And it's a very interesting looking record store. I mean, they have talked to... They've talked to Fred Frith and some other American artists that have been here, and everybody that has talked about Wave have been very positive about it. I know that actually they're looking forward to being able to go back and slip off their eyeballs and their coats and sort of come back in a little later and look around and look at the store.
まあそれじゃあこういうお店みたいなものに関してはどうかっていうことなんですけども、まあフレッド・フリスとかいろんな人から、例えばウェーブっていうののことを聞いてて、なんかウェーブの宣伝係になったような感じですけども、まあみんながとっても、この店はいいというので、来てみたと。でレジデンツのメンバーも後で普通の服装に着替えてですね、密かにレコードを見て回りたいと思っているというようなお話でした。And the city in general?
いや、いいの。
どうぞ。
いいの。
So, in Tokyo there is a strange mixture of what is very tiny, miniaturized, compacted, and what is huge and gigantic and totally functional kind of things. So there may be a possibility of strange mixture, hybridization of mass culture and very minor culture or underground culture, something like that. And in comparison with the situation in the States, what is your impression or opinion like as to this?
Well,
for example, the shows in Tokyo was, the place for the shows were on the top of department store in Tokyo. Right. It's quite paradoxical, isn't it? At the top of the department store there is a hole, and in which we felt as though we had been in a nuclear shelter or something like that, crowded, compacted, etc., etc. It was very paradoxical, amusing, and at the same time quite embarrassing, something like that.
Yeah, it's very different from the United States too. I mean, you do have a situation here where, if you go to a department store in America, it's a department store. I mean, you won't go there and see concerts. I know there are department stores here where they have movie theaters. There is a lot of sort of cross-culturalization here. That's very interesting. I mean, the fact that you see so much English, and the way the Japanese will just pull out a few words of English and just put them in is very interesting because once again you don't get this in America. In America it's English and that's it, and you might see a little Spanish here and there or something like that, but the fact that there is so much sort of crossbreeding between the cultures is very fascinating.
Just in the Blade Runner,
Right,
which he
sure,
mentioned.
exactly, same thing, same thing.
でまあ、それから昨日のショーなんかはデパートの上にあるホールでやったわけで、キンキラキンのエレベーターに乗ってデパートの上に上がってみると、いわば穴蔵みたいな空間があって、でそこで、核戦争のシェルターに入ったような気分でああいうものを聞くというのは、面白くもあるけれどもなんとなく当惑するような気分じゃないかしらということを聞いたんですけども、実際その東京で起こっているこの種の、異種交配というのか一種のなんていうのかな、横断的な結合のようなものっていうのはとっても面白いと。でアメリカではデパートはデパートでコンサートホールはコンサートホールと、こういう種類のその横のぐじゃぐじゃのつながりというのはちょっと非常に奇妙な感じがするということでした。それで、特に日本人が英語の言葉を少しずつピックアップしてで適当な文脈に置き換えて使っちゃうっていうことにすごい興味があって、それはとっても面白いんじゃないかっていう話でした。
The eyeball figure? Sure. I mean, they didn't really know anything about it, but I can talk about it some. Sure.
Here's the show. The eyeball show of the residence is mostly inspired by the Japanese little monster fantastic monster called Zashikiwarashi. It is a tiny monster on the tatami sheet. Is it true?
Actually, the residents had never really heard of the Japanese character until just a few days ago.
The Gegege no Kitaro da.
And one of the what happened was one of the residents' fans made a small ceramic figurine for him. It was it's just very, very beautiful. It's a small female figure with a big full dress, and then it has an eyeball on top of it. And this was sent back to the residents after the show. And included in the box were these small plastic figures, one of which was the small eyeball figure. And then the next day, during some interviews, one of the writers brought the comic, or a copy of one of the comics, and the residents have all looked at it and they've been very interested in it. But it's just a coincidence that it's the same.
Was it female? I think it's male.
Well, the figure that was made for the residents was female. But the
original
one looks right.
Okay.
ゲゲゲの鬼太郎のね、多分そうだと思うんだけど、コミックを彼のその小さな陶器製のなんかそのミニチュアマスコットをそのコンサートの後にファンが持ってきてくれて、それを説明を聞いて、なんか日本でも同じようなことを考えている人がいるというのを知って非常に興味深く思った。それはただの偶然だけども。But I hear that you have another project of comics which includes comics of
Moles and Chubs?
Moles and Chubs, right. There are a lot of comics that have been done. These are done, these are not published by us, but Ralph Records sells these comics. They're done by an artist in Pennsylvania that publishes them himself. And I understand that Wave is interested in compiling all of them and perhaps putting out a book. Which would be very good. They're very good comics.
ゼリーには自分自身の漫画のシリーズがあって、それは自分たちで売らないで、ラルフレコードがペンシルバニアのある出版社の人に渡してしまったので、今彼が持っている、それ多分ウェーブがその出版系交渉をしてるんじゃないだろうかって、でもし出版されることになったら非常に素晴らしい漫画なので見てくださいということですね。
So, for the closing, let me talk about the little monster Zashikiwarashi he just mentioned.
Okay.
When children gather together in remote Japanese countryside, when children gather together and count their numbers by themselves, for example, the result, for example, 13, but evidently there are only 12. So they count again. The result, once again, is 13. So the Zashikiwarashi is this extra one. This is a very fascinating idea, isn't
See,
it?
it is very interesting.
And maybe this kind of existence, nowhere and everywhere,
Right.
Always being an extra one, is very good. Well, totem or symbol for the residents.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right.
So maybe you have remote ancestors in.
Well, I think that's actually very parallel. The residents are sort of there and they're never there.
So.
I mean, you wonder who they are, but if you found out, you probably wouldn't care.
それで座敷わらしのことを最後にちょっと喋って、子供たちが集まって自分たちの数を数えると、例えば13人だと。明らかにしかし12人しかいないんですね。それでもう一遍数えるとやっぱり13人だと。で、この残りの1人っていうのが座敷わらしであったりするわけです。で、こういうふうに常にエクストラの1人、某批評家の言葉を借りれば幻のもう一人というのですけれども、そういう形で、どこにもいないにもかかわらずどこにも現れてしまうっていうふうなことがレジデンスの、コンセプトとだいぶ近いのではないかという話をして、彼も多分そういう日本に、古い祖先がいるのではないかというふうなことに同意したりもしたわけです。So we wish you, in the near future you will have a next tour or something like that. So
Well, the residents hope very much to come back to Japan again. I mean, this is, once again, it's been the whole trip, the whole time here. And most of them will be here for another week, just sightseeing. But it's been very enjoyable. They've really enjoyed the Japanese people and hope to come back soon.
また日本に帰って、今回はあまり時間がなかったけど、またゆっくり帰ってきたいということです。
Do